Good afternoon, good morning to all of you. I understand we have people joining from all corners of the globe today, multiple time zones. So good morning, good afternoon to wherever you might find yourself. Welcome to our very first session of the series of South-to-South exchanges on urban food governance. Today we're looking at the Brazilian framework for multi-level governance, and it's a really great honor and privilege to have all of you here today. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. And it's always great to see that there's a bit of a continuation of this network that we're building through both the Network Cities program and the wider webinar program that we're running. Today is officially the 10th webinar that we're hosting as part of the AfriFOODlinks webinar series. There's several still coming up this year, and we'll invite all of you to have a look at the AfriFOODlinks website where we lay out all the different webinars that are coming up, but also we have some debriefs and digests on the webinars that we've already previously had. So my colleague Sine will pop the link to our website in the chat, and all of you can feel free to jump on there. So before we dive into the webinar, I'll just invite all of you to just take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. Always nice to see who we have in the room, and also a great platform for people to connect. To note, this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared afterwards. So please do let us know if there's an issue from anyone with the fact that this is being recorded, but we'll ensure to share it afterwards, and you'll also be able to find it on our website. And then as usual, as those of you that have been in our webinars, we're trying to keep it as interactive as possible. We have quite a jam-packed program and many presentations today, but if at any point you do have a burning question, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand, and we'll ensure to make space for all of those that have questions. Toward the end of the program, we'll have quite a bit of space where we can have a bit of a Q&A and discussion. So, without further ado, it brings us great honor to delve into this topic of urban food governance in Africa and in Brazil, and exploring some of the lessons and unpacking some of the really important similarities that we share and can learn from each other. Across the world, there's a growing recognition that urban food systems need more coordinated and inclusive governance and decision-making processes, and that's what brings us here today. However, in Africa and across many different continents, local governments don't have an explicit or a funded mandate to work on food issues. This mandate often sits at a regional level or at a national level, very much with departments of agriculture, which makes food systems governance often very centralized and very detached from local realities, especially in countries such as Brazil, which is a massive country with a wide variety of local realities, local ecosystems, and the functioning of the food systems is inherently different from one space to the other. But the major issue that we're seeing, and many of our partners across the globe and the continent are seeing, is that local governments are already working on food and working on food systems across a wide variety of departments, be it the departments of agriculture on a local level, social development, waste management. This is part of their efforts to deliver service, the basic services, and we're recognizing that local governments are already doing this work, but the fact that there's no funded or explicit mandate means that they're not getting the necessary resources and capacity needed to do the work that they're already doing. And there's also this growing recognition that local governments have a particularly important role to play in addressing food security and to support livelihoods. And in order for them to do that, we need stronger multi-level governance that is also inclusive of the stakeholders on the ground. This means coordination across different levels, and we'll hear more about the Brazilian experience on that, where we have a governance model in which there's alignment and coordination between the local, the regional, the provincial, and the national level. Moreover, we also need a mode of governance that includes a wide variety of stakeholders and prioritizes their perspectives in the decision-making processes. These include researchers, civil society, communities, and the informal sector, which is both a very powerful force in the food systems of both Africa and South America. So, to contextualize a bit of the African context and aligning it with this growing recognition of the need for more inclusive, collaborative, and coordinated governance, it's important for us to share that there's already quite a bit of work happening in this front. We'll hear more from the Brazilian example, but to note that as ICLEI and the AfriFOODlinks project and a wide cohort of organizations committed to supporting local governments in developing more coordinated and inclusive governance models. Examples such as the Food and Agriculture Organization and work that they've done in Kenya, specifically working with Kisumu and Nairobi, where they collaborated with the county governments to establish and develop food strategies, as well as what they call the food liaison advisory groups, which were multi-stakeholder governance platforms, which in essence supported the creation and the design of these local level food strategies. These were some of the first of its kind in the African context. When we're looking at partners such as Ricolta and the work that they're doing in Arusha and Tanzania with the Sustainable Food Systems Platform, which is focused across all different elements of the food systems, such as food safety, waste, nutrition, and they've got action tracks specifically to each of these specific areas to ensure that there's coherent and collaborative implementation. Similarly, in Uganda, also with Ricolta, in a city such as Mbale, they've established the Good Food Parliament, which is a cohort of diverse stakeholders informing and contributing and adding their voice to decision-making processes. We also see this in Zambia with the Lusaka Food Policy Council, which now through the AfriFOODlinks project is exploring this idea of a food coordination desk, which is a position within the municipality appointed to coordinate all the different food activities, projects, and programs across the variety of departments. So very exciting to see that there's this momentum being built in the African context as well. However, it's not without its challenges. We're seeing as a lot of these interventions are being funded by external actors and working in collaboration with local governments that don't always have the capacity and resources to run these things, there's an element of dependency that forms. And when the projects close, often we see these platforms and initiatives that gain momentum implode. And that is why with projects such as AfriFOODlinks, we have the ambition to support these cities in continuing the momentum that they've built with a really strong focus on sustainability. How can we ensure that these projects continue, these interventions continue beyond the project's time frame? A big part of this also is to facilitate intercity learning and the cross-contextual learning. This is part of the broader peer-to-peer learning strategy, of which this webinar series is a really important part. Is we cannot do this in isolation. We have examples from across the world, brilliant examples of how more coordinated and inclusive governance models have been developed and are continuing to do really important work. And it's for this reason why we are so honored to have Julia Tângari from, excuse my pronunciation, my Portuguese is not great, Comida do Amanhã Institute. She'll be sharing her experiences of the Lupa project, which we think is one of the best case examples in the Global South about how cities can better streamline and drive coordinated governance in a multi-level governance framework as well. The Lupa project is a collaborative platform for enabling equitable, sustainable urban food systems. However, before we hear from Juliana, we'll first hand over to Sarah Nakalila, my colleague from ICLEI Africa. She'll be running over an issue brief that has been developed by our team in collaboration with a variety of other partners that looks at some of the funding opportunities and gaps for driving improved urban food systems governance. This forms part of a wider network which is called the African Network of Food System Collaboration, if I'm not mistaken, and it it's working with the Africa Climate Foundation, as well as the Center of Excellence in Food Security, which is the growing network, a cross-continental network of organizations and institutions committed to driving food systems transformation. With that said, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Ivan. As Ivan said, we did a lot of research around urban food governance and in the context specifically of Africa, and we pulled some voices from experts around the continent and beyond. This includes Juliana as well, who also informed some of the key findings that we highlighted in the issue brief. So I'll just excuse me, I had a bit of a cold. I'll just highlight key hurdles having to do with transitioning and then towards effective urban food governance, as well as some recommendations that emerge from our conversations. With a bit of a presentation just to have you follow through. Right, can I get an indication if you can see this?
Yep, we can see.
All right, great. Okay, so we know that the journey toward resilient urban food systems is complex and it comes with several obstacles. And in the African context, we firstly looked at one of four or about five key aspects came out of conversations and the desktop research that we did. Firstly, is the conflicting government mandates that tend to create confusion and slow progress. National and local governments and even different departments within the same city tend to have overlapping or competing priorities, and mapping these responsibilities can help cities see where they can connect and work together more effectively. Secondly, having too many stakeholders with different interests make it hard to reach agreements. This is something that was highlighted as well, and many people engage with food systems informally and without clear policies or regulations. It tends to be difficult to align priorities. Thirdly, that runs into a lack of inclusivity, which means that important voices like informal vendors or the urban poor and even private sector players are left out of decision making, and governance structures need to find a balance between different interests without sidelining these key players. Fourthly, limited capacity and resources make implementation difficult. Many local governments don't have the right skills or enough funding or proper data to develop effective food policies. Investing in capacity building will help city leaders make informed decisions and take meaningful action. And then finally, inadequate integration hampers for food governance. Poor coordination between government levels tend to slow down progress, and national policies don't necessarily don't always reflect local realities, and food-related work is spread across different departments that don't always communicate. And food governance needs to sort of have an integrated, need to be integrated across all levels of government to be effective. So going into recommendations, how do we address these challenges? These are some of the recommendations that emerged out of the conversations we were having and the research we did. Firstly, starting with having effective support for cities. Partnership is key. Cities should work closely with regional organizations like the FAO and invest in multi-stakeholder platforms that bring different voices to the table. FPCs, these are food policy councils, are also a great way to encourage collaboration, but they need long-term funding to remain effective. Second, food governance needs dedicated support. Creating food desks within local governments and securing funding for food strategies is set to ensure that food issues aren't sidelined. And then thirdly, one of the other aspects that came out was scaling up successfully and the impact that can have. Medium-sized cities where governance is simpler can be great testing grounds for innovative food strategies and can serve as an example for larger cities that can learn from them. Finally, another item or a key highlight out of the issue brief was the strong public participation, which is crucial. Communities must have a say in food governance, or it changes much of the processing and the strategies that come out of these policies and these platforms, and can reflect real needs from the communities, and this can strengthen civil society. And strengthening civil society and setting up local food councils can also help create lasting change. So overcoming these hurdles requires a huge commitment, collaboration, and strategic investment. And I think just based off what we gathered, it seems that aligning mandates, strengthening governance structures and food policies, cities can transition toward a lot more sustainable and inclusive food systems. Yeah, so that's mainly some of the key takeaways that I brought forward, and I believe Juliana would dive even deeper into these issues.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Really, really interesting findings and recommendations that come out of that. Once the issue brief is ready for publication, then we'll be happy to share it with all of you, and very excited to be stepping into this journey of figuring out how we can best support local governments in improving the inclusivity and collaboration coordination of their governance systems. With that said, very, very excited to hear from our next speaker, Juliana, about the Lupa project, the lessons learned, and how we can engage with that further. Thanks so much, Juliana. Over to you.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Sarah, for this introductory notes. And I can say that it's very similar to what we find on this side of the globe. So we are very aligned. And thank you all. Thank you for all the ICLEI Africa team for organizing this webinar. We've been talking for a while, and I'm very, very, very glad to join you today. Finally, we have an event together. So I see that there are some Portuguese speakers participants today, but I will be speaking in English. But feel free to reach out and chat in Portuguese if you prefer, and I will try to answer you all. So let me share my presentation with you. Okay, can you see my screen? I believe so.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so my idea is to talk a little bit of my work or what we are doing and from where I'm speaking to you today. And then we're gonna dive, and I don't want to bore you, but I'll try to dive on the specifics of how this framework in Brazil worked for aligning food governance at the three levels of governments that we have in Brazil. So first, on the first part of it, I just want to share that I'm from Comida do Amanhã, so Ivan spoke it precisely. And we are a think tank organization. We work, of course, with intelligence, advocacy, and mainly to support in projects that support and programs that support cities with the urban food systems related thematics and orientation and learnings, etc. And our key program is LUPA, the Brazilian Lab on Urban Food Policies, that we run in partnership with ICLEI South America. And so, as Ivan briefly said before, Lupa was launched in 2021. It started as a platform for capacity building and knowledge sharing, but it developed, or it occasionally became a program. And today we see it also as a network of cities, because every year we have like year editions. We have like 10 to 12 cities joining the program, but we don't lose any of them. So it's oriented each year for the cities that are joining in that year, but it developed and evolved as a network and a community of cities, and that we are always trying to facilitate like this peer-to-peer cooperation in several ways. So it's very close to what you are doing in AfriFOODlinks. So the same idea, connecting cities and make them learn with each other. And as I said before, it's a partnership between Comida do Amanhã and ICLEI in Brazil. And we are supported mainly by philanthropies. So Brazilian philanthropies, like this first line of logos. And a lot of organizations that partner with us from the academic and other think tank institutions to support us with knowledge sharing and the seminars and webinars that we run throughout the year. And we have 5 cities that we call them mentor cities. So this is Belo Horizonte, Curitiba, for those who know Brazilian cities, Osasco, Recife, and São Paulo. So these 5 cities support us in these programs, especially in these mentorships that we run throughout the year. So this is kind of a map of what we have now in Brazil. So we are now working with 54 cities. So all these yellow stars are the cities we call them the participant cities, so the cities that we are working for. And these orange dots are those mentor cities that I mentioned. So these are our partners. They support us in giving all the activities that we run. So together, all these cities are now around 450 people that are related, connected in this community. And every year we have a major in-person convening moment that we call Lupa Lab. And because we started during the pandemic, we didn't have it on the first year. So now we are starting the 4th edition of Lupa, and we're gonna have our 3rd in-person convening. The last one of this picture at the left side was in Curitiba. And the next one that will be in May will be in Barcarena, which is a city in the north of Brazil, very close to Belém, where we're gonna have the COP30 in November. But our event will be in May, so 6 months earlier to have it very, very smoothly. And just to share with you that for now, Lupa has been acknowledged in some in the international community. So it's a Brazilian program oriented for Brazilian cities, but it has been acknowledged by FAO in the SOFI 2023 and the IPES Food report of 2023 as well, and the HLPE report last year, 2024. And all those publications were about urban food systems governance, and or urban food systems improvement and support, etc. So we are very proud to be there. And because of the experience that we have added all this year, all these years. Now we are now almost 4 years working with cities with this methodology specifically. We are very glad to be invited for the Food Paths project that eClay Europe invited us to be part of the Mirror Group. We are now a member of the School Meals Coalition, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. Last year, we had like major participation also in leading the C20 working group on food systems. And this left up picture is this the urban agri-food systems workshop that FAO and eClay held last year, and it kind of evolving like a global community on urban agri-food systems. So we are very proud to share all this knowledge around the globe. So, okay, so as I mentioned, in Lupa, we support cities, and we are looking especially what they are doing at city level and what are the opportunities and challenges that city governments and local governments and civil society at city level face. But we are doing this at city level because we have a framework, a national framework of how we align governance related to food security. It was initially designed for food security and nutrition policies, but 18 years after, we are using this framework not only with this food security lens or straight approach, but also with this more broader approach of food systems. So this is a little bit of this structure that we have in Brazil. So Brazil is a federation. So we have 3 levels of government. We have the municipal level, the state level, and the national or the federal level. So we have 27 states and 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. And by around the year 2000, we have in Brazil the beginning of a big strategy for fighting hunger, known as Zero Hunger Strategy. And it was the beginning of a lot of programs that started in the early 2000s and are as programs to fight poverty, to fight food insecurity. But it eventually became like policies and programs oriented for ensuring food security, for ensuring healthy environments, healthy food environments, and food supply, food sovereignty, etc. So at this around 2006 or 2005, because we had a lot of problems related with how we approach it was like a top-down approach. So how the federal government would incentive cities to work towards fighting hunger. This structure was designed in a federal law. So it was like a top-down framework. And the idea was to have at every level of government a local or state or national policy council. So a place where, or a forum where civil society organizations or civil society representatives and government representatives met to dialogue, to debate, to decide what were the most challenges of going on. A conference not that will happen and that will meet every 4 years, where civil society only representatives will meet to guide the civil society organizations at the policy council. So it has this flux of what the food conference guides, decides for the next 4 years should orient, should guide what the Food Policy Council is debating and dialoguing and working with these government representatives within it. And the Policy Council should have like a regular activity together with the food agency. I don't know if agency is the best word in English to translate what we have, but the idea in Portuguese we call it chamber. So the acronym is Kaizen. You see it in the up side of the slide. So this is a working group, but within a legal framework, but a working group of the public officials related to the ministries at the national level or secretariats at the state and municipal levels that work with policies that have a food orientation or a food relation or related with food somehow. So just to give you an idea, at the national level, this chamber, this agency has more than 20 ministries together. And we have in Brazil around 30 ministries. So of course, the social assistance / food insecurity or nutrition ministry usually is the chair of this group. But we also have the health ministry, the education ministry, food supply, agriculture, planning, financial, etc. So there are a lot of ministries if you go to the national level, and a lot of secretariats, or if you go to state level or municipal level. So these representatives, the idea is that these representatives, these government representatives at this agency are the ones that are inside the policy council. So the same people working, the same officials working together to design food strategy, to coordinate food-related policies, are those that should, at a regular basis, keep talks with civil society organization at the policy council. So the policy council usually is very, very larger than the chamber, than the agency. And the policy council, closing the circle, is oriented by the conference. So it's a very complex structure. And the idea is every 4 years, this agency, oriented by policy guidelines, oriented by the previous conference guidelines, should launch a 4-year food strategy. So now in Brazil, we are on our third national food strategy, because we have like a break, a 4 years break from 2019 to 2022. But since 27, I believe, we have these 4-year strategies. So the first one, the second one was like, we are trying to understand what we are doing. So a little bit of everyone putting their goals and objectives and targets there. But the idea is making it really not a complex of dotting completely different, but really try to align it for a more national-oriented target. And of course, the first ones were more oriented to take Brazil out of the hunger map. And we are now really on the point that we are talking much more about food sovereignty, food supply, food resilience, climate resilience, social biodiversity, etc. So these concepts are very new in this framework, because this framework was not designed for it, but it's how it evolved. And we take advantage of it to, at the municipal level, work with these structures. Now we have in Brazil all the states, 27 states, with this structure working and doing the purpose that it should do. And around 1,000 cities in Brazil with that structure in place. So it's not mandatory. It's an incentive that the federal policy gave to states and municipal governments to develop this governance structures. So it's not mandatory. But I would say that the interesting thing is that the first structure that we see in the municipal level with all the cities that we work is always the policy council. So a lot of cities, or the large majority of cities, have the policy council in place. Few cities have the municipal food agency or food chamber in place because it's very tricky due to political issues. And I would say that a lot of cities too hold the conference every 4 years. But what's still missing, or what we are still working for, is the municipal food strategy. So we have a lot of cities with, I would say, few cities with really 4-year food strategies in place. A lot of cities working for launch its first food strategy. So I would say that that's the moment, 20 years later, that we finally have this movement of cities developing and launching their food strategies. And for us, it's very, very important, because if you want to have policies oriented by a food systems approach, we really need a strategy to bring coherence to all these programs that usually are run in fragmented ways, with budgets not aligned, with targets not aligned, with trade-offs not aligned. So strategy is really, really, really a tool to give coherence to all food-related policies. So that's what we are working for in Lupa, in Comida do Amanhã. But in the Brazilian scenario, we have now with the current federal government a great incentive for this food governance at municipal level coming on, because we have, just parentheses for you, we have a program at national level, a food procurement program, which is called PAA. It is the food acquisition program of Brazil, by which the federal government funds family farming food procurement for social assistance, food insecurity assistance programs. So it really is a source of resources for family farmers. And it's implemented through city level, so through this federal mechanism. And if a city is not in this national system of food policy governance, what the name is, I haven't mentioned before, but it's the left side, the name is season, the acronym. So if a city is not in the season yet, it cannot have its PAA budget. So it now a lot of cities is joining the national system, which is very good for us, because we really see advantages, even if it's not budgeting advantages, but it's advantages in policy planning. Okay, so I will try to give you some specifics about the food policy councils. So the idea, within this national frameworks, it doesn't need to be this way in every level, but usually states and cities mirror what the national policy is. So within this framework, the chair of this council should be given to the civil society representative. It usually is 1/3 members from the government, and 2/3 from the civil society. And these 2/3 members should select one of them to chair the council. And as I mentioned before, these 1/3 government members are those from the Kaizen, are those from the group that designs the food strategy. So it should be a council that meets regularly. It should be supported by the government, in the sense that the government, if it's the federal, the state, the federation, the state, or the municipality, it should fund like a secretariat for the council and the meetings. Even if nowadays we have all those meetings going on digital way, so it's not more in-person meetings. But when we have in-person meetings, it should be funded by the government, because it's not a civil society forum that works like separated from the government structure. It is intended to be an hybrid structure from the government, of the government. And okay, so that's the council calls the conference, the 4-year conference, as I mentioned before, and it should not have private sector members. So it should be civil society organizations only, in the sense that those civil society representatives that really needs a space to put their voice. So those voices that usually are not very heard in policy making should use this space of the policy council. And I say that's not as I mentioned before, it's not mandatory. In some states and municipalities, sometimes we see like food industry representatives in these policy councils, but it's not the idea. That's a very vivid thematic in Brazil right now about conflicts of interests between private organizations, especially food, private sector, food industry and agriculture and big ag organizations, and how they do not and how we do to not allow them to capture policy making, food policy making. Okay, so that's an overview of the councils, and as I mentioned before, it usually repeats at state level and municipal level. And moving to, okay, and just to let you know that in Lupa, cities, so in Lupa, it's the program that we run, it doesn't have anything with the government, but we ask cities to be represented both by their governments and their food policy councils. So asking city members of Lupa to have their representative of their local food policy council is a way that we use to incentive these policy councils, these local food policy councils, to be more to be enabled at the first place, and to be more active and really understand how policy making works. Okay, so another deep dive in these agencies for food strategy development, and as I mentioned before, we call them Kaizen with this Portuguese acronym. So sorry, I've just saw a mistake here. It's not chaired by the civil society, of course, because it's only government members, and usually the chair is the social assistance / food insecurity secretariat, because historically these are the offices that have more food-oriented policies to look after. But sometimes we have agriculture offices chairing the municipal food policy chamber or food policy agency. We can have like two types of these agencies. Sometimes we have the Kaizen organized by the chief officers, so the Secretary of Education, the Secretary of Health, the Secretary of Social Assistance sometimes, or we have another format for it when they are composed, organized by technical staff only. We have, of course, advantages and pitfalls in both. When we have the chief officers, we have more political commitment. We see when we have a Kaizen, an enabled Kaizen with chief officers, we can say, or you can assume that the mayor really have a commitment, a political commitment with the food policy, with the food systems, etc. When it's more, but at the same time, it's more difficult to see Kaizen meetings. Sometimes just they meet twice a year because it's more complicated, of course, when you go to high-level offices. So when we see Kaizens organized by technical staff, they are more agile, they bring more results, but sometimes they can lack this political commitment of the other type of Kaizen. So we are still watching, observing, and trying to see which one is the best, but we see both of them going on. And as I kind of mentioned, usually these secretariats or the offices are social assistance. Usually the social assistance includes food security coordination or something. The health secretariat, of course, due to health food programs. The education office due to the school feeding program. School feeding program together with food security programs are the main food-related programs at municipal level. So these are the key guys that we need them when we have a Kaizen, enabled Kaizen. And of course, an agriculture one, if this is a municipality with rural areas, with a high number of family farmers. And I say this because Brazil is very urbanized. Our urbanization rate is more than 80%. I think it's very different from the average African countries. The South America, if I'm not wrong, is the more urbanized continent. And Brazil is like 85%. So a lot of cities or a lot of municipalities don't have agriculture offices anymore. So that's why I'm talking about a lot of this. And we see the environment or / sustainability or green office, the name varies, but this office usually is the one handling urban agriculture. Urban agriculture usually is in that one. So 5, 6, 7, 8 the most are the number of these officials that come together to launch this Kaizen that should meet regularly and should design the food policy and monitor the food policy along with the Food Policy Council throughout the years. And when it comes to LUPA, because we don't have a food secretary yet, a food office, and there are as I mentioned before, food systems have so different entry points depending on where the city is located in Brazil, where is this territory. We don't choose any specific focal point. So cities are represented by any secretariat that they choose to be the food systems entry point. And as a matter of fact, we asked them to not be represented by one secretariat only, but by 2 or 3. And with that, we have a very rich environment of different backgrounds in LUPA participants, which is very important for us to keep this food systems approach to food policy making. Okay, thank you so much. I hope you didn't get bored with all these details of government structures, etc. And I'm very keen to answer your questions. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Juliana. That was incredibly interesting and rich and relevant to, I think, a lot of the context that we work in. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of similar challenges faced, but what's so inspiring to see is that there is this national framework in place that you can kind of plug into within the Brazilian example. And I think in the vast majority of African countries, we do not have a framework such as this in place. So it just gives you a really comprehensive idea of how exactly food policy councils can fit into this, how food policy councils can be supported and financed, whether it be by a state level, local level, or a national level. Gives us a lot of ideas. And we've joined by a variety of large number of city officials on this call whom I'm sure have many questions to ask. But just looking at the chat now, there's three questions in there that perhaps maybe we can dive into first. I have too many questions of my own, but perhaps let's look at the ones in the question. The first is, how can I learn more about Comida do Mañana's work in Natal? And then the second from Esther is, if private sector is not represented in the Food Council, how do you capture their needs, propositions, and challenges? Very interesting question. Very interesting that it's a rule to not include the private sector. We have this conversation over and over. And then the second question, also by Esther, in the Kaizen, which departments take care about transport? Transport and energy infrastructure, logistics, markets.
Okay. So yeah, the private sector issue, as I said before, is the current more hot topic in food policy debate in Brazil. We have now a commission at the Kaizen working on it. So how is there a way to set some guidelines for private, public-private partnerships for food systems programs implementation? Is there not, etc. What we are doing, we have to say that this framework is very close to what we have for the school feeding program. So the school feeding program in Brazil is funded by the national government, but it's implemented by cities mainly and a little bit by the states. And because it's funded by the government, it's a mandatory structure. So different from CISAM, that is just an orientation. It's not mandatory. The school feeding governance is very rigid because we have a flow of federal money for states and municipal level. So a lot of things that were developed or debated or set by the school feeding governance, was mirrored in the season structure. So the private sector issue was very debated on the school feeding financing. I'm just giving this. I'm sorry to give this step backward, but I think it's necessary to understand the story of this. So for us, because we fighted so much for having healthy school meals, we didn't want like Coca-Cola, Nestle, etc., funding school meals, and by that advertising their products. So not having food industry funding or participating in the school meals programs or school feeding policy was very, very important for us. And we managed to get that. So when it was mirrored in the food security policy, the food security, let's remember that at the beginning it was food security only, or food insecurity, better saying, only. So that was the same idea. We don't want industries like washing their products with the hunger, fighting hunger motivation or something like that. So we don't want Coca-Cola giving Coca-Colas for food banks, etc. So that was the key idea. And another another issue in Brazil, and maybe that's the same in some African countries, we have a deep conflict between big ag or big farmers and smallholder farmers. Fight for land. We have a very violent rural environment, and because all those policies were oriented for, or they were targeting family farmers. So at the beginning, in the 2000s, family farmers were seen as the main, one of the main populations that were facing food insecurity. So fighting rural poverty was important to achieve food security or to achieve to end hunger. So these policies were very smallholder farmers oriented, and of course that big farmers wouldn't be very glad with that. So avoiding their interference and the policy design was very important to safeguard the whole idea of smallholder farmers support by federal policies. So big ag and food industry were from the first time we tried to avoid their interference, and I think we did very good, because 20 years later now we can, okay, let's see where exactly you can get in, but we are now strong enough we set the ground so they can, I don't know how, but they will join, but they will have something that is already done. And I say this very proudly because I think it's quite the opposite in the United States. When they, from the beginning, were trying to do policies with the private sector involved, and it's very difficult to hand this, where do you stop them from capturing the social policies for economic reasons? So, okay, so having said that, I do think that we have to find ways to engage. When we talk about like small and medium entrepreneurs, so SMEs, it's very easy to make them join. So we see like SME, is that the correct English acronym? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we see these SME organizations or representations, better saying, in municipal level, usually they join the policy council. What we don't want in the policy councils is this big food industry, the big food egg, because we are debating like regulation, that this label of front of package label regulation, etc. So if you let them in the policy council, maybe we're gonna lose all the things that we already achieved. So yeah, that's very, as I said, we are debating a lot on this. And the other one is which departments take care about transport and energy infrastructures, etc. If you are talking about logistics, energy infrastructure, etc., for food supply, usually we have two ministries in Brazil. One is the agriculture ministry, so the Ministry for Agriculture, and the other is the Ministry for Rural Development. And food supply infrastructures are kind of split between of them, but mainly with the rural development or the agrarian development ministry. If you were talking about transports at all, I don't see at the national level, but at the municipal level, we are seeing a movement of free public transports policies as a way to ensure food security or to fight food insecurity, because transportation is a very high budget or ratio of the family budgets, of vulnerable family budgets. So giving them free transportation or free public transports is a way to keep up with their food security, but at the municipal level. I don't see that at the national level. Another one?
Great. Yeah, I think we have time for a couple of more questions. So perhaps I can pose just a brief question, because I think it will flow in nicely to this idea of a food strategy. So we currently working on a project that's called Food Click, where we are embarking on a journey with 3 different cities and supporting them to develop food strategies. In the South African case, at least, there is, in the integrated development plan of the city, mentioned a line saying we must develop a food strategy. But what we're seeing with this is a very strong commitment from the technical level. So people working on this and seeing how this will be beneficial to them, but a bit of a pushback or disinterest from a political level. So when looking at the Kaizen and how they sometimes structured with the chief officers, who are the political heads or heads of department, or the technical staff, my question is maybe twofold. On the one hand, how did they manage to get buy-in from the political level and commitment from the political level? And then secondly, when it's driven or run by the technical level, how do they manage to actually implement the programs if the political level is not involved? I hope that's clear.
Yes. The second one is easier. The first one, I would say that's the $1 million question. So how we get political commitment to the agenda, right? So that's our work for in Lupa. We are trying to advocate for this upgrade of political commitment to the agenda. Okay, so a little bit of realpolitik. When we have these secretariats, these offices, they are struggling to have their piece of agenda in a higher level than the others. So usually we have more competition than coordination. When we're talking about realpolitik, like that, for a political party to win election, you give offices for each of the parties that make that the winning one. So it's very difficult to say you're gonna share your programs with others, or you're gonna align your programs with other at the political level, if you don't have the highest political commitment. So in my experience, usually you have these chief officers when you have the mayor saying, okay, that's important to me. And during the first years of these strategies, we had a federal government that elected fighting hunger as a very important political commitment topic. And of course, it influenced all the other levels to do so. When we had, but it's only fighting hunger, okay? We did not have at the early 2000s all these food systems approach. We're not talking about climate issues at all at that time. So when by the end of 2017 or 2018, I don't know, when we exited the hunger map, the FAO hunger map, we kind of, okay, we are food secure now. We don't face hunger anymore, and we saw that this issue, like downgrading in the political scale, it was very clear that happening. And by 2019, when CISAM was broken by our last president, Bolsonaro, we saw those like, the territory. If the federal government says it's not important anymore, why are we gonna do it? And that's exactly where and when and why we launched Lupa, because we were in this middle of chaos from the federal level, and we wanted to do something with cities that could be engaged somehow, like support cities that didn't want to lose all the history that they were doing with food policy. But now that we have again a federal government saying not only fighting hunger is important, but ensuring healthy diets for all, and ensuring fighting climate change, we see those agendas going up again at all levels. So of course, we cannot misrepresent the importance of, in a federation, of the federal government. But even though we have, there are other strategies by which we make the agenda goes up. So if we are in a very vulnerable, like high rates of poverty territory, food security and work is important. So we try to choose that food security policies need to align to family farmers or food system services, work generation and income generation, because it's important for local development. And as a matter of fact, I would say that that's the narrative that it's the winning one. When at least when we are talking with municipal authorities, we can use food systems for a way to improve local development, local sustainable development, of course. And it's important to find a narrative that can both take advantage from federal incentives and how can I say this? Be resilient for a change in the federal incentive. So if the federal incentives stop again, let's say in the next government, we need to build resilience at municipal level. So using the local sustainable development narrative for us is is very a key issue. But it's always about advocacy and how we use strategies for advocate for food systems related policies and strategy. Another argument is how we implement and design policies with little budgets. So strategies are important for aligning budgets as well. So for the technical staff, that's enough. That's enough. But sometimes it's an argument, it's a big argument for political staff only, political offices only, also.
Thanks very much for that really rich insights. And I think many of us on this call, there's the kind of the 4 points that came out of that are really important. And once again, the advocacy issue is huge. So then we've got 2 questions from Luke. The first is, thanks so much, Juliana, very rich. I'm really interested in how councils are tracking impact and implementation of strategies they develop. In such complex systems, how are councils capturing the full scope of impact they're having? Should we maybe take that question first and then see if we've got time for the follow-up question?
I thought to be quick on this. So of course we have very levels of councils in the way that levels of capacities. So some food policy councils can really understand a strategy framework, like having goals, targets, and deadlines, etc., and track it. So you're gonna see in these cities policy councils meetings really looking into it. And sometimes you have policy councils with a low level of capacities, so they won't be really tracking the targets and deadlines of strategies, but talking about the problem. So it doesn't matter what we are doing, the government is doing, we're still facing such issues. So talking about the issues that they have on day-by-day policy implementation is a way of monitoring what's going on, even if they don't know exactly how to monitor food policy at all, public policies.
Great, thanks. I think we can squeeze the 2 last in, and then we'll stop it over there and wrap up. They're both really interesting questions. So, the second question: in the absence of national frameworks, one of the strategies we are seeing effective in cities we're working in is starting to build local coalitions around specific topical entry points. What has the Brazilian experience been at a local level around the topical entry points that have the most power, bringing together lasting local coalitions? Thanks for that question.
Okay. School feeding, for sure. Because as I mentioned, we have a very complex governance structure and framework for school feeding in Brazil. So once you have school feeding programs in place and running very well, you have this state capacity that is built upon it. So a lot of the agriculture office, the health office, the education office, at least these 3 need to come together to put a good implementation of school feeding program in place. So for sure, that's a very powerful entry point for us in Brazil. So of course, it will depend on how school meals programs are implemented in other countries. So school feeding is one. I think, and that it still is food insecurity programs, because they usually join forces from social assistance and agriculture, because you have to have this food. Once you have programs that procures food from family farmers, you need to have agriculture and social assistance coming together. And yeah, so food security or food insecurity and school feeding. And in Brazil, we have like food markets, street markets, and I think whole Africa is like the same. So this food markets programs is always a very good entry point, because also you have to have the food planning, the urban planning, the agriculture office coming together, the health offices for food safety measurement and monitoring. So that's also a very good one.
Great, really, really interesting. And in Africa, I mean, it's similar, but what we're seeing as the main entry point, especially more in East Africa, around which people are forming these coalitions, is around food safety. We've seen that being a really successful maker of coalitions, so to speak. All right, then we will take a look at the last question. Could I ask part of Ivan's first question from the other direction? Given that Lula has been instrumental in supporting food security and healthy food policy, would you say that designing and implementing a comprehensive, successful national food security policy is possible without leadership from the highest political levels, nationally speaking? In other words, can this work from a kind of bottom-up approach based on municipal best practices, but not necessarily coming from the national down?
Oh, it's very difficult to talk about other scenarios because, let's say, in Brazil, we have a federation, so municipalities have autonomy, government autonomy, but they are very dependent of federal funding. So it's municipalities are strong enough to legislate, but not strong enough to fund their programs. So they are very dependent on the federal government for funding. So I think it always depends on the scenario of the country. If you have strong municipalities with, by strong, with the capacity of design policies, implement policies, and fund policies, I think that in theory a bottom-up approach can work too. But it also depends on how the political power is split between municipalities and the federal level, I think.
Great, thank you very much for that question, Adele. And I think that also builds on the point you previously made around building the financial case. As a municipality, how much will you save if the strategy is properly implemented, budgets are properly implemented? Don't hate me, but I think we can do one more question. We've got a question from Cynthia, and it reads as, what would you attribute to state buy-in into developing a food system strategy at the highest level, at national level? Was this achieved through private sector lobbying, or was it government initiated?
I don't know if I understood it.
So, Cynthia, feel free to jump in, perhaps.
Because I mentioned that the private sector had nothing to do at the beginning, so I don't understand.
So I think here we're looking at what led to the national government, in essence, developing this policy. What was the key reason for doing this?
Okay,
if I understood correctly, or is it because sorry, go ahead, Cynthia.
Good afternoon and good morning to others, perhaps. Yes, you are correct, Ivan. I just want to establish what prompted the state to actually develop a food strategy for Brazil. Was it because of circumstances in trying to address food safety? Or was it the private sector that put pressure on government to develop food strategy? Or was it willingness from government to just do it to address the circumstances or the challenges as seen on the ground or in communities? And that's what I just need clarity on. And then maybe if I can add another layer to the question, I might have missed it, but I just need to find out where does the food strategy sit in state? what specific ministry does it sit in? Thank you.
Okay. So as I mentioned, at the early 2000s, we have a strong political leader in Brazil that decided that his political or his government first issue in the government would be ending hunger. So it was a social commitment or a social policy or a policy for social reasons. So fighting poverty, fighting hunger, fighting rural poverty, as I mentioned before. So doesn't have anything to do with the private sector lobbying. And it was, and this zero hunger strategy was made by three main policies. So cash transfer policy called Bolsa Família, which is very popular around the world, I believe. So giving money for people, for poor people. And of course, this money, like free money, would support them in buying food. So cash transfer, school feeding. So the school feeding was the second main program or policy for fighting hunger. So for school feeding, universal school feeding, let me correct, because we have a school feeding program since 40s, but it wasn't universal. So since the 2008 or 9, school feeding meals became free of charge for all students in public schools. So school feeding, cash transfer, and this food supply program that will both be a food procurement program for buying food from school, from family farmers, and giving this food directly to social assistance organizations that were taking care of food insecure people. So these were the pillars of the zero hunger strategy, and the motivation for it was pure altruistic. I think we have a leader at that time that really wanted to take Brazil out of hunger and out of extreme poverty. I don't know if I answered it.
That was very clear to me, and I think, Cynthia, yeah, in a South African context, we've got quite a lot to talk about in this regard, seeing as we do have also a overarching food and nutrition security plan, but it's not necessarily being rolled out in the same level, in the same way to a local level.
Sorry, she also asked me which is the ministry responsible for implementation of food security. So there is the names change every government, but nowadays we have a ministry for social assistance and fighting hunger and family, for family and fighting hunger. So social development and fighting hunger or something like this. So this ministry is the one that chairs the Kaizen and is the one that implements the Bolsa Família program, so the cash transfer policy, all the food insecurity policies and the food security policies, I mean, health, environment, legislation, regulation, etc. And chairs the CISAM structure, that the one that I showed to you. So this ministry, the ministry is Wellington Dias, and he is now the how can I say it, the global chair, or the chair of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. So it's the same guy.
Another very interesting lesson that we can learn from the Brazil case is having this ministry at a national level to coordinate all the way down. Thank you very much, Juliana, Sarah, and all the participants for your really interesting questions. I think we could have continued this conversation for much longer. I see Adele also posted a link to an article that they wrote based on the similarities, some similarities between the South African and the Brazilian case. And I think beyond food, there are so many similarities between at least South Africa and Brazil, and I think many of the other countries in our continent and in your continent. There's so much opportunities to learn. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the first of a series of webinars on South-to-South learning on urban food governance. In the next webinar, we'll actually hear from the cities that participated in and benefited from the LUPA project. I think we'll both have the mentor cities as well as other cities participating in that. As I said, information on all the upcoming webinars can be found on our website. And that will be a really interesting one to continue this conversation. But the webinar directly to follow this one, I can't exactly remember the date, is also related to the issue of food governance. It's in April. We'll share it in the digest afterwards. But here we're looking specifically at how food systems can be better coordinated at a local level within the city council or municipality through what can be called a food desk, a food security office, so a coordination unit within a local context itself. I see we are joined here by Evelyn from Lusaka City Council. In this webinar, we will be looking at Lusaka's plans for developing and institutionalizing one of these coordination desks. So please join us for that one. It should be interesting as we delve deep into these issues of urban food governance. Once again, Juliana, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. It was so interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.